Hey everybody, I'm so excited. We have an amazing author with us today, and it's a very inspirational story. And my name is Jency. I'm with Love Acting in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And today we have Hans Kullberg, and he is going to talk to us about his book that he wrote for his daughter, baby Aviva Orangutan Diva. It is the coolest book, and we are so excited to be talking to you today, Hans.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit. You have the beautiful imagery behind you, and tell us a little bit about this book, and tell us about yourself, and just let us know how this book came about.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and start telling you a little about myself. I am a proud father of four, and I really take my job as a dad very seriously. A lot of dads say that's their number one priority, but for me, I really try to put that into action. And from the time that they come out of the womb to the time that they're toddlers and they get into the cookie jar like they just did this morning. I really try to be there with them and be present with them, and be very hands-on and really make sure that all of the time that I spend with them is a very quality time that I do. And so other than that, I have been an entrepreneur in the past. I do a lot of other things, but I really love the process of creating things and really putting things out there into the world and really taking these ideas and visions and really kind of taking action on that. And so that's part of how this book came about. And so I'll try to unpack that question because it's a pretty loaded question. I should probably start by telling you a little about my daughter. My daughter Aviva is my sweet, brave, angelic third child, who had a radiant smile. She had this contagious laughter. She had just really cute cherub cheeks that you just wanted to squeeze and hug and kiss. And she had this zest for life. She was very easygoing. I would say she's been my easiest baby between my wife and I. And she really loved everybody. Everybody loved her. And she just, had this charm that really brought you into her orbit. She also looked up to her big brother and big sister. They're 18 months and 3 years older than her, respectively. They loved her immensely. They were smothering her with love from the very first time that they set eyes on her in the hospital. They were all snotty-nosed, and they came up and gave her a big hug and kiss. And she loved dancing to her older brother's harmonica. He used to play harmonica, and she used to dance around and have this really great video of her with food in her mouth, and she's just teasing and giving him like a big dance just on her butt, because she didn't walk yet. So she also had a very big appetite. She had her dad's appetite. She loved eating everything in sight: avocados, bananas, berries. There's this one road trip that we took to Oregon. We were living in Northern California at the time, and we stopped to pick up some raspberries, and we drove probably 30 more minutes, and then we looked back, and she had all these red stains all over her face. She looked like a little mini. She looked like she just sucked the blood out of someone, but she just loved food, and I'm lucky because I got to spend 100% of her life with her, with Aviva. She was born in January of 2020, January 5th, 2020, and of course, we all know what happened in March of that year. And so that made me work from home. And by virtue of that, I got to sit with her on her on my lap. And she used to play underneath my feet and just used to rock her to sleep on conference calls and everything. So she was really, really, I felt a very special bond with her in her life. And so I'll stop there, and if you like, I can kind of go into the book as well. But
yes,
that's a little Aviva.
That's a little bit of Aviva. Oh my gosh, she's so precious in her photos, and you can almost feel her spirit by looking at her photos. She's like the most vibrant human. Yeah. So what was your experience, and how did you end up writing this book? I mean, how did it come about?
One of the reasons, the inspiration to write this book is to really remember Aviva's life and really to create a legacy for her, a legacy that she won't be able to have. And so for your listeners, the hardest thing for me to say and the hardest thing that I've ever had to experience was the loss of my dear daughter, Aviva. And she died at 10 months old in November of 2020. Prior to that, she had 5 other hospitalizations in her life, starting with the very second week of her life, 9th day of her life. To this day, we still don't know what she died from. She had never had a diagnosis. However, she had these constant patterns of bradycardia, which was a slow heart rate, hypothermia, so low temperature, lethargy, sweating, and apnea, so a little difficulty breathing. And she had those typically after prolonged periods of sleeping. However, they only happen 5 times in her life. And that ninth day of her life, we immediately saw these signs, and we saw that she wasn't reacting, she wasn't feeding as she should have. And her being our 3rd child, we decided to rush her to the ER. Doctors, poked and prodded and put a spinal tap on her. They, looked at every single kind of infection under the sun. They took, DNA samples. There wasn't anything that they were able to find. However, she recovered within about 48 hours. And because of that, they thought this was something that would go away and wouldn't necessarily continue to hamper her later on. However, she had it again 3 months later, and then progressively every couple months after that. And so, we thought it could have been a metabolic disorder or maybe a mitochondrial disorder, which is the part of your cell that creates energy. However, we weren't able to even find that out. And so, she ended up having her 6th episode, but this time it was accompanied with vomiting, and she went to the ER. She was certainly looked very sick, looked almost like a flu-like symptoms. The prior week, the nanny, a babysitter that we had the flu. And so we thought it was just the flu and nothing more than that, because it was a little bit different. But she was recovering the same way that she always does. And she was even sitting up and eating a graham cracker and drinking water out of a straw. And we thought it was definitely the road to recovery. But lo and behold, it was just about 2 hours after I left the hospital, because I was outside of the hospital given COVID. I got a call from my wife saying that her heart rate had dropped precipitously down to about 20 beats a minute. And she basically had multi-system organ failure. Her levels of potassium in her blood were very elevated. So potassium is the serum that they give criminals on death row for the death penalty. They inject potassium in the blood. For her, for some reason, her body was creating this on her own, and it basically got to extreme levels, and her whole body basically gave out. So there's been lots of analysis, lots of trying to figure this out. Lots of doctors looking at this, even detectives looking at this. They have done extensive investigations under it, but we don't have any semblance of what it is. And so we don't really have closure on that side. But I should say, that was certainly the hardest day of my life. And when I held my daughter in my hands and they let us, have a couple hours with her at the very end, I told her I loved her. I absolutely, wanted to do everything for her. And as a father, I just couldn't imagine a world where I didn't, speak about her, that she couldn't have a prolonged presence in this lifetime and create her own legacy. And I told my daughter as I held her in my hands, I will do everything I can to make her proud. And that was my promise to my Aviva. And so, there's certainly a lot of emotions, a lot of, 5 stages of grief and everything else, starting with really just shock. Those first couple of days and weeks. But one of the things that I experienced was almost this abundance of creative juices of almost creativity that I wanted to basically, get out into the world. And so I started writing. I've been writing a memoir that's been taking the better part of the last 15 months. But I've also been writing children's books. And so Baby Aviva Orangutan Diva is my homage to my daughter, to allow her to meet other kids, other toddlers, other kindergartners, that she would never get to meet, and for them to meet her, more importantly, and is for other kids, starting with her own siblings, but hopefully kids around the world that are able to meet my beautiful, vibrant, energetic, zesty daughter, Aviva, and are able to be inspired by her, be able to kind of absorb her message and really understand who she is as a person, but more so, have these life lessons that they can carry on with them throughout their lifetime in a fun and creative way. And so that is how the book came about. It was actually written within, I would say, 2 weeks after she died. It just brings me a lot of joy, for me just talking about her. One of the misconceptions about child loss is that we bereaved parents don't like talking about children, our deceased children. A lot of people don't even ask about, Aviva, obviously, on a day-to-day basis. And so for me, being able to read the book to classes, to talk about it on podcasts, and, to have this, prop almost to basically lower that barrier and allow people to, ask questions about Aviva and them to get to know her, has been, very meaningful for me. So.
Was there a reason that you picked a monkey for Aviva?
Okay, it's a good question, and first of all, I'm going to have to slightly correct you a little bit. So orangutans,
sorry.
Orangutans are very, talk about misconceptions. They are actually not, they're confused for monkeys, but they're actually part of the ape family. And so monkeys and apes, yes, very similar, very, very, they look the same, but so they're part of the gorilla family. I believe chimpanzees are part of the ape family, but orangutans are, for starters, they're definitely one of the smartest animals on the planet. They're such a genteel spirit. They just exude this. The word orangutan actually comes from, I believe it's an Indonesian word for human of the jungle. So orang and utan are two different words, and yeah, it's like the human of the jungle essentially. So the reason I picked the orangutan is we live in San Diego, and at the time we were San Diego Zoo members, and one of my very last outings with my kids, I actually took all three of my kids at that time to the San Diego Zoo while mom was actually working, and we had a blast. I used to love doing this, and I remember that specific trip. I had all three kids, and Aviva was strapped to my chest, and this mom looked at me. She's like, "Man, you're like super dad." I'm like, I'm just a regular dad. I just, love spending time with my kids and showing them animals. But we had this long, exhausting day. We saw, all the tigers and lions and elephants and everything else. And right before nap time, around 2:00, we came upon the orangutans. And the other two, her two siblings were, kind of breaking down. They were just really tired and exhausted. And Aviva was just completely intrigued and curious and in love with these orangutans. She was just staring and watching them go up these trees and eat these fruits. And we were talking to the zookeeper, and we stayed there for about 20, 25 minutes. And she just had almost this, connection with them. And I remember that, very clearly. And when I was thinking about, animals, I knew I wanted to have an animal. Orangutans immediately became, the first, the first animal I thought of. So, other than that, they are an endangered species. They live in Borneo and Sumatra, in Indonesia, and their homes are being devastated. They're being cut down because of palm oil plantations, and you can actually Google orangutans in the forest, and you can see there's a very popular video of orangutan actually trying to fight against this big truck that's coming to cut down trees. And so you hear a lot of books about monkeys, Curious George, or gorillas, but you don't really hear that many books about orangutans. And I just wanted to call attention to that, and maybe some kid will hear about it and ask about the orangutans, and maybe have efforts to support them via conservation matters or groups, etc. So
I love that. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. So you're a writer, and you decided to pour your creativity into writing this book. What was it like for you personally when you sat down to write the book? Was it an emotional experience? You said it came out in 2 weeks. Did it feel like just kind of poured out of you, or what was that like?
Yeah, it just came pouring out of me. Just all these creative juices at that time. And there's nothing else that I could really think about, to tell you the truth. And in terms of those first couple of weeks, a lot of it, just taking care of yourself, as I learned through going through therapy. Self-compassion is probably the number one thing that my therapist, told me. And you have to take time. Bereavement leave here in the U.S. For corporate, most corporations, it's like 2 weeks or 5 days, if that. Of course, when you have a loss of a child, no one really expects that. There's no, 5 days or 2 weeks doesn't really even amount to anything, right? And the unfortunate tragedy was, I was supposed to have some of my paternity leave with her, that last month of the year, wasn't able to do that, unfortunately. But just in terms of that creativity, I'm kind of, I would say, a hapless romantic. When I met my wife for the first time, I was like writing poetry all the time for her. And so it was kind of like that. It was just more about trying to figure out a fun way. And I think that's important, especially for kids and parents, a fun way to really create a book that kids will love. And for me, as a dad, I love reading, the Dr. Seuss books. And there's a book called Giraffes Can't Dance, which I really love. And so I was always inspired by a lot of these great books, and always wanted to, put my own mark on the world of children's books. And so, and it's also something that I do late at night or when I put the kids down to bed, I always like make up these fantastical tales of dragons and unicorns and race cars and everything else. So it was just like a natural extension of that. So
when you read the book to kids, what is their response when you get to the tiger, like part, and then just overcoming that fear? What is their response with the dancing and all of that? How do they respond?
Yeah. So the tiger is this fearsome beast of the jungle that nobody wants to, even come near. And one of the reasons I wanted to include that is really Aviva kind of goes and faces off against him, but she's not doing that in the typical way, not using her physical features, which she's just this diminutive orangutan, but rather uses her inner strengths, which is singing and dancing, to face off against this fearsome tiger. But yeah, when I read it in classrooms, the kids just really kind of cringe. Ooh, like it has like really sharp teeth, and there's a part where the tiger roars, and and the kids just flinch a little bit, I think, and it's a good precursor to how he actually turns out, and given that roar, you can the lesson there is don't judge a book by its cover. It's really just understand who that person is, who that potential bully actually is on the inside, because he can become your new friend if you really just get to know who that person is. So.
I love it. So what was the process of actually getting the book published and finding your illustrator? How did that all come together?
Yeah, it was a lot of sheer determination and hard work to really understand, going from zero to getting it published. In terms of, I knew my very first draft wasn't the final draft. I mean, it just wasn't like a polished form. And so the first part was actually getting an editor. And so there's a lot of different freelance websites that have these freelancers that do everything under the sun, right? And so I found this editor. Her name is Brooke Vital, and she used to work at Disney Books. She wrote a lot of books, but she edited thousands of books, and she knows exactly kind of, just from a literary standpoint, understand the meter, the rhyme. And so she made sure that my meter, which is really that cadence of how you're actually creating these words. For example, Dr. Seuss, when he couldn't fit the meter, he would actually like make up words, like gobbledygook.
Yes.
And he would, that's like his little claim to fame. But the reason why is because when you're trying to fit meaning plus rhyme plus meter all in the same context is actually very, very difficult. Kind of, you only have like a handful of words, first of all, to rhyme with, and then get the meter right. That's a whole nother challenge. So wow. She has helped me out tremendously. She's actually just helped me. I'm going to give you a sneak preview. It's with my second book that will be hopefully coming out later this year. And she just did a very fabulous job, and she just had this, a very critical eye to what I'd say was my unstructured form of the book. So that was the first part. And Carl Mefford was another freelancer. He's actually worked for Scholastic Books. I interviewed, and for both of these, I've interviewed, maybe 10 different people, 10 different illustrators, and he certainly came out on top. From his previous work, from his reviews, from the rapport, more than anything else, just the rapport that I had with him, him being able to kind of take my ideas and and really put his own professional expertise on them. And I would say, even as detailed and intricate as these illustrations are, a lot of his other work is just blown away. If you actually go to his website, much more intricate, much more detailed. So yes, it's been awesome. Like, we started with stick figures, really just trying to put the characters on the pages and see where the words would fit, and then really do something called pagination. So it's really when you're trying to map out what goes where. And then slowly and surely, second round, third round, fourth round, you start to get a little bit more clear and crystallized version of those illustrations themselves. And we did a lot of character sketches. And so for baby Aviva, the orangutan, we had about 4 or 5 different iterations of what she would look like. And I had suggested that she had some features like Aviva, like the real Aviva. he actually pushed back on that, and I'm actually glad that he did, because it would look a little weird if you had this human face on the orangutan body, and yeah, so he made Aviva look like a real orangutan, and all the animals are very realistic. So so that was the creative part of it, and then there's another part of getting your ISBN number, getting your Library of Congress number, getting copyright. Those are kind of standard things that you have to do along the way, and just really researching that. And so I've joined a lot of other children authors groups, as well as other authors, so for any books type of groups, just to understand what that process will look like. And then when it comes down to printing, so you have Amazon, you have Ingram Spark is one of the most renowned printers. They print for a lot of different bookstores, for libraries. They have different specifications. So actually getting the formatting right, that was actually a very difficult part of the process, making sure it fits the right lines and everything. And then when it comes down to launch time, it's really about getting a launch team and basically rallying the troops, getting family, friends, but really just strangers, actually, people to really believe in the book, and get it out there, and be willing to buy it, be willing to leave a review. That's very important for just the validity of the book itself. And then hopefully that would then just build upon itself. So you're kind of almost like building this snowball, where you want to get into a lot of different channels, a lot of different places. And this
you must have done a really good job, because I saw in your bio that it was one of the best sellers on Amazon for a while. Or
yeah, it was, especially those first couple of weeks when you get a lot of momentum, which is great. What I've learned is that you can get momentum, but then sustaining that is a whole different story, and it starts petering out. But nowadays I'm invited to classrooms, like people, teachers and media managers for different elementary schools will like reach out. So if you're listening to this and you are a teacher, you'd like me to read, I'm very, very happy to do that. But I'm doing some book signings in local bookstores, trying to get into different libraries, getting reviews, which is a very important part of the process. So there's a whole world of marketing, and I think I would say probably 80% of my time has been, just trying to get the book into people's hands. But it's something that I really want to do, because my only goal for this book is to get people to really know who Aviva is, and hopefully inspire them from her message. So.
I have two questions. What can we do for you, people who are watching this video? What would be our best, should we call our local bookstore and be like, hey, you should have this book in your bookstore? What can we do for you across America if we were all watching this video? How can we help Aviva's story go forward? And how would we do that? How can we help you?
Yeah, no, that would be great, to get your listeners to call their local bookstores and ask if it's in stock. What I would say is, even better than that is really just purchasing the book on Amazon, or it's in Barnes & Noble. It's in a lot of other places. It is an audiobook format as well, narrated by yours truly.
Oh, that's amazing.
And if you do purchase it, if you do like it, then please feel free to leave a review. No obligations, of course, but yeah, reviews go a long way. And then finally, just tell your neighbors about it, tell your other friends about it. I think that's word of mouth, I've found is really the best form of communication. And honestly, for me, for selling the book, actually doing these in-person classrooms, where a lot of parents would buy the books for their kids is actually been the best channel for me, to tell you the truth. But yeah, I just love talking about Aviva, and I really, really appreciate you making the time out of your day to have me on here.
I have another question though. So if Aviva was here
Mhm.
and maybe she's watching from somewhere, what do you think she would think about the book and what would her experience be like?
That's a good question. I think she would really enjoy looking at the pictures of the book. My kids, the two older ones, they just love books. I mean, they're just like book, what do we call it, bookaholics or something. They're just addicted to them, and they can't read yet, but I think they'll just spend a lot of time looking at the pictures. And if you do take a look at it, you'll notice that Carl has done these full page pictures, which is not typical for any kind of illustration. Usually you have a lot of white space and you have maybe a couple characters, but really it takes up the entire page, the length of the page. And I believe there's about 34 pages of illustrations, which is a lot of work, a lot of it's been a labor of love, a lot of blood, sweat, and love has gone into it. So I think Aviva would really just appreciate the story, the message, and I just wanted to share one thing with you. A lot of the cool things about the book, you actually you really don't know the background, but so this is the tiger, the back side of the book, but this is Tito the tiger, which her older brother is Hansito, so that's kind of him. This is Sophia the elephant, which Sophia is actually her older sister. She loves elephants, so that's her. And so this is Aviva kind of walking off into the sunset.
Love that.
With her brother and his
got
sister.
Chills.
So
it's
yeah,
so
this is probably my favorite illustration of the book. And it's the back page, but a lot of the other cool stuff that you probably won't be able to see, and I'll point out to you. You can see here with Aviva and Tito kind of giving a hug, but you might notice a heart back there. So this little heart-shaped palm leaves, and there's other things as well. There's a picture of her. I'm a big surfer. I love surfing, and I always envision surfing with Aviva, but this is Aviva kind of surfing. Yeah.
Whoa.
Down the trees, but
I love that.
But there's a lot of hummingbirds and butterflies throughout the book, and those are kind of symbols of the afterlife, which I believe I truly believe that Aviva's having a great time in the afterlife right now. So yeah, that is her.
Oh man. Well, thanks so much. How can we find you? What are the different ways we can find you? We're going to pop those up on the screen, but if you want to just talk a little bit about some of your favorite ways to connect with people. Yeah.
So if you want to know a little bit more about Aviva and her life and actually the legacy that she's creating right now, we started actually, so the best place to go there is just my website. So it's hanskullberg.com. And there's a whole section on Aviva, and it'll show you a lot of pictures of her and even a video. But we started a fund in her honor, which a portion of the book proceeds will go towards. It's called Aviva's Women in Science Fund. The purpose of that is really to advance science, among women, and really one of the travesties about her loss is that we still don't know how she died, and we believe there's a lot of advancements that can be made in the medical field, and we really just want to kind of promote more women in science. We believe that she could have been a doctor or researcher, or my parents are chemists, maybe that, but so that is one way to learn more about her. But in terms of reaching out to me, there's a little contact form there. You can just pop your name in there, and down on the bottom of the website, and reach out. I do respond to individual emails, so feel free. And then social media links. It's usually Aviva's dad or Aviva's daddy. Hopefully you'll be able to share those with your audience.
Also, one more thing I wanted to ask you. What would you say, this is more of emotional, and then another emotional question, I'm kind of going back and forth, but For other grieving parents, what would you say to them when they first lose their child, or they're trying to overcome, and maybe it's been a year or two and they haven't written a book or they haven't done anything? What would you say if they're really struggling with the letting go process, or however it feels like? What would you say to them?
Yeah, and I guess first thing I would say is not necessarily a letting go process. It's really more of a grieving journey, but embracing the journey. I would say, the very first thing I would say is I'm very sorry for your loss, and the very first thing I'll do is give them a big hug and let them know that I'm thinking of them. Those seem very simple actions. However, when we're talking about child loss, it's a lot of people are uncomfortable even doing just that, even just showing up and saying that they're thinking of your loved one. Society in general just has a just almost like a nervousness around child loss that we just can't talk about. We can't bring it up. But I want to see a world that we break down a lot of those barriers, that we know, how to kind of act and react to parents that have lost a child, which is, certainly nothing any parent should ever have to go through, and certainly one of the hardest periods of anyone's life. Very, very sensitive and emotional time period. But I would say, embrace the grieving process as much as you can, and embrace it. Don't try to run from it. Don't try to hide from it. Experience all of the emotions of it, the pain, the anger, the depression, even the loneliness, the isolation of it, and really fully, sit in that grief. Because if you don't, there's no right way to grieve. Every single one of us has their own unique way. I have a very different way of grieving than my wife even. And everyone has a unique way, but there is a wrong way to grieve. And that is by not doing anything at all, not grieving, and trying to lock it in a box and put it away and don't talk about it, don't bring it out. What I've seen and what I've read has been a lot of times that would actually come out and manifest itself in detrimental ways, either alcoholism or anger, or a lot of things that you really don't want in your life. And there's a statistic that about 50% of couples that do experience child loss end up getting divorced. A lot of times it's not about the loss itself. It's more so about the different forms of grief, and one person wanted to move on and not even talk about it. The other person wanted to, wallow in the pain and really have conversations about it. Or, they're on two different levels. And for my wife and I, she's a much more private griever. She doesn't, necessarily, talk about it like I do. For me, I want to talk about Aviva anywhere, anytime, with anybody. And, but it's something that we both understand, and we support each other along the way. And for me, we've certainly been there for each other, supporting each other, and we've gotten closer, I would say, as a couple, as a family. And so I think loss can actually do, one of the two, make you further apart or bring you further closer together. And so, time and self-compassion is the number one thing. I would say, don't blame yourself. Don't put too much guilt upon yourself. I know it's a very natural thing to do. Survivor's guilt is very, very real. There's a lot of things I wish I could have done. Things that play back in my head that I wish I could take back. But what I've learned from reading things like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, or even David Kessler, one of the foremost experts on grief, his book Finding Meaning, or even Holocaust survivor Edith Eger's a lot of them are saying almost the same thing. It's really not about what happens to you and the adversity that you face that will define you, but it's actually more about how you're able to respond and react and adjust to that drastic change in your life, dramatic change in your life, and that path for responding is important. Dr. Edith Eggers, who's another psychologist, Holocaust survivor, she says, from the Holocaust, she saw two different types of people: those that just survived, that lost the will to live, and those who were able to kind of thrive and create a whole new life from the cell after experiencing something completely dramatic. And so so yeah, it starts with self-compassion. That's the number one thing, and time take it all in, and not everyone's going to write a book, and not everyone's everybody's going to have something different. And what I would say is just try to do what makes you feel like you're able to heal, that you're able to both honor your loved one, honor your child, and carry that love with you, because love never dies. Grief, the extent of your grief is really, dictated by that extent of your love that you have for somebody. It's almost like looking at a mountain on a lakeside, and that the height of the mountain is reflected by that depth of the reflection on that lake. And I would say that's kind of symbolic of what grief looks like, and how deep it actually is. You never really grieve anybody that you don't love. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. Hans, thank you so much for sharing that heartfelt, I guess, moment for people grieving. And a lot of people will probably never have to experience this, and hopefully not. And then there's a lot of people who will have gone through this, and they will hear what you're talking about and totally relate. And I just thank you for being so open and encouraging to people who are going through this kind of grief. Can't even imagine what it would be like, honestly. So.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing I would say is really, try to be open-minded to get help as much as you can in different places that you can. And for me, I've never had seen a therapist in my life. I was probably a person that always would say, I don't need to see a therapist. But for me, what I wanted to feel is really, I wanted to be open-minded and really, if there's something that could help me, you're at a point where you're most vulnerable. I knew I needed any help that I could, from strangers, from therapists, from anybody. And, for my illustrator, putting these amazing things together, he did something for me that I can't ever repay him. And so, just take an open-minded approach to your grief. It's a very new process. It's something that not everybody of us, all of us experience at different times of life, whether you lose, a parent, a sibling, a dog, or a child. It's, it hits us at different points in our life, and it's not happening to everyone at the same time. But COVID has had an effect on a lot of people, where you see a lot of the population, big percentage of population grieving. And so it is a very real thing. I think it's something that we have to talk about. It's something that society doesn't deal well with in general. And take your time and be open-minded, and get as much help as you can from anywhere.
Another question, for people who are on the outside, let's say we're a friend of yours or someone who, we know someone who has lost a child. What would you say to us, like someone who hasn't gone through it, but we know someone who is going through it? I mean, I know buying the book would be an amazing thing to do. That would be cool, and passing it to them. Or I'm just saying, a lot of times as a person who hasn't lost somebody that close to us, we don't know exactly how to approach the situation. So how would you say, what were you like wanting or needing from other people that maybe they did or didn't do?
Yeah, I'm actually very glad you asked that question, Jency. And it's a very important one. I think it's one of the most important one because I would summarize it in 2 words. Show up. Just show up. That's it. It's actually something that sounds so simple, yet it's so hard for most people to do. To this day, it's been almost 16 months since I lost Aviva. I still have not heard from a lot of my best friends who have completely just abandoned me. Haven't texted, haven't called, just haven't heard from them. And I don't know the reason why. It might be they're uncomfortable around grief. But a lot of times people just don't know how to respond. And it's a very, very natural question. But something as simple as a text message saying, hey, I'm thinking about you today. I'm thinking about Aviva, can go a long way. You don't know how much that can mean. But even further than that, just giving a phone call, maybe not immediately after, but maybe 3 months after, 2 months after, at some point in time, that griever is going to want to talk to somebody. The first couple of weeks, I wasn't answering phone calls, but after that, I just wanted to, say a lot, get a lot off my chest, and really, express my anger, express my frustration, express my sadness, have someone cry with me. Some of the best conversations I've had were with friends on the other side of a Zoom call that just sat there and listened. And I think listening is a much underrated, much undervalued skill set that we don't really pay enough attention to. We have a culture that's all about meditation and self-awareness and understanding the thoughts that are going in your head, right? However, we kind of ignore, listening to others and really understanding who they are. And the very first step to empathy is to really listen, is to really kind of imagine how it would feel if you were in their shoes. And that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. They tend to think about their feelings and they've kind of projected. They say, well, I don't want to bother him because it's going to make him feel bad, or I'm not going to ask him about Aviva because he's going to cry. Well, that's the farthest from, that's a very big misconception, farther from the truth. I'd love to cry. I'd love to talk about Aviva. It's really about, a lot of times, people being defensive about their own emotions. And so in terms of, things that people have said that can be a little upsetting, things like, well, she's in a better place now in heaven. Well, she was in a really good place in my arms, or God only, tests the strong ones, which, it's very difficult. Or even, you're so strong. I don't want to be strong. If it means I can have Aviva back, I want to be weak. I think the most, powerful form of strength, especially for men, especially for dads, is really being vulnerable. It's very difficult to be vulnerable. A lot of people said, be strong for your family. Well, my wife is certainly crying and certainly devastated, but I am too. Yeah. And I think the first step is really trying to admit that. But here's another one, and I'll say it because you actually said it.
I did say it. Oh my gosh, I said it. I know what you're going to say.
No, one thing is, I can't even imagine.
I can't even imagine. Oh yeah, I said that.
So those 4 words, I can't even imagine. It's actually taken out of context. It's actually, I understand what you're kind of getting at. You're trying to empathize, right?
Right.
You're trying to show your sympathy, trying to show your empathy. but when we say those words, I can't even imagine, which is probably the number one statement that I get. It's if you think about it, like we have dreams, we can imagine different things, different devastation, different calamities, etc. When you say you can't even imagine, that's basically beyond, someone's worst nightmare, because you can't imagine a nightmare, but you can't imagine, a child dying, which is every parent's worst nightmare. And so, when I hear that as a recipient, the way it lands is like, well, I'm sitting here living through literally the worst thing I can even ever imagine, but you're saying you can't even imagine it. Yeah. And so the first, as I said, the first form of empathy, the first thing you have to do is really try to imagine. And I don't want anyone else to experience it. Don't want anyone else to be in that position ever. Not even my worst enemy, but what we all can do is actually try to imagine. And so what I would say to that, I can only imagine.
Oh, that's good.
Which is complete opposite, right? You think it sounds,
yeah, it's great.
Imagine,
I mean,
I can only imagine. They're actually 180-degree opposite, and that really shows a lot of empathy, shows a lot of sympathy. But I can't even imagine. Always stings when I hear that, but it's very common, and it's something that
it's almost cliche on some level.
It is. It's cliche.
Just like boom, like a line or something.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure how it got there in society. But when I was talking to one of my friends who's a doctor, and she was just really dumbfounded that I was telling her how it landed. She was like, you know what? They actually teach us this in medical school. They teach doctors whenever there's someone that passes, which happens all the time, to console their family and say, I can't even imagine. Well,
it's right there. I think I went to social work school, and that's where I probably picked it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which I think there has to be a little bit of review on that.
Yeah.
But really, speaking with the grievers and how that lands, but. Yeah, I mean, there's the list can go on, but I told you I'm writing a memoir, and it's about Aviva's life, but it's actually more about the grieving journey and what it actually looks like from the inside out. And I've over the last few years, or a year and a half, I've read over 30 books on grief and child loss and afterlife, etc. But what I believe there's missing in literature is actually a book that's intended for supporters, family, friends, colleagues of grievers, so that they can really understand and really know what that person might be going through. So I want to be vulnerable and share my journey through that, and thoughts that are going on in my mind, so that hopefully. When someone passes, they can kind of read that book and know, a little bit better of how to console a broken heart. So.
Wow. That's amazing. So we can follow along your journey through your website, and that'll be released, and we can kind of follow up and do another interview possibly when that comes out, kind of do a launch.
Yeah. And so coincidentally, the working title I have for that is Imagining the Invisible Wound. And really just
sounds awesome.
It's this wound that we all, bereaved parents and anyone grieving really holds within their heart, right? But you can't see it on the outside. So you live like a normal human being and fully functioning and everything else. But it's a real handicap. It's definitely a mental handicap. And it's it's something that a lot of people say they can't imagine. So that's kind of what.
Oh, I love it. I'm glad we hit this moment so that we could dive into this a little deeper.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really excited. I mean, and I guess interested in this process, because I've had family friends go through it. And again, we feel numb or dumbfounded, or we just don't know how to approach the situation. And once you said and showed up once, you don't know how to do it again, and like, what do I do on the next visit? Or and then I love what you said, just showing up and being present and listening.
Yeah, no, I've thought about this a lot, and really, if you kind of like look at our world and look at our society and how we actually interact with each other, most of it is via text and email and social media and everything else. But like actually, one-on-one interaction, it tends to be a very small part of our communication and talking to someone in person. Um, but I even like looked at, studied, what is the science behind tears, right? Why do people even cry? Do you know the reason for that, Jency?
I have no idea. And that's what I do for a living. As I'm an actress, so I teach people how to cry. I mean, that's what I love to do. So please tell me. I would love to know.
Which, by the way, I've done acting classes in New York, and that is definitely the hardest thing to do on stage. But actually curious about that, I'll side note this. Whenever I did have to do that in acting school, I took the Meisner technique.
Yes.
I stood backstage, and I used to have to, think of something sad and bring that to mind. But songs always like get me. And so I would take my AirPods and listen to Eric Clapton's "Tears in Heaven," which always gets me. It strikes that chord. And this is 10 years ago. That's about losing his son. So anyways, that was kind of a coincidence. But in terms of what was I saying?
You say, why do people cry? What is
why do people cry? When you go back to even the prehistoric era, like the caveman era, people had had cavemen going out and hunting and searching for food. Of course, there's loss during that time period as well. And so when a mother or father, or anyone loses somebody, they would cry, and that would send a social signal to the other cave dwellers that this person is vulnerable, this person's weak, this person has lost someone. I, as a supporter, should go and console them. I'm getting these cues, these social signals that I should actually go there, comfort them, tell them they don't have to go out for the next hunt because they're going to be vulnerable to the saber-toothed tiger or whatever. And that's, a way for, everyone around them to actually rally around that person who's lost someone. And that's the power of community, which is, right there in the open. But when we, look at society today, we're all living in our little worlds, in our little boxes, in our little houses. And there's not, for me, I was, felt like I just wanted to hibernate in my house, shut myself off to the world. Nobody really saw my tears. Nobody saw me crying. No one really saw the physical manifestations of that grief. And that's really, it really hurts that griever. It really, makes that feeling of isolation and that, you're the only one in the world going through this, even much more poignant, essentially. And so that's why it's important upon the supporters to actually reach out and actually make that effort, which is very difficult. It's not easy to do. And to tell you the truth, most people don't do it. But what I've heard, what I've experienced from a lot of people who've been there for me is that there's been other people that have just come out of the woodworks. People who I haven't talked to in 10 years, they come and they call and they check in. And I wonder why, but the one commonality between those types of people is that they've all experienced loss themselves. And they know kind of what that feels. And so it shouldn't take, that for someone to really understand. And so I think a book will be an easier way to understand it. But yeah, that's just kind of what I wanted to say about that. So.
Wow. Thanks for the vulnerability. And, I really look forward to the book. I can't wait to come back and discuss it more when you have it out and we can talk about it and learn more, from you about this.
One last note. I'll give you a little sneak peek for your audience. The second book, which should be coming out later this year, for children's book, is called Stella Seville, The Sloth That Stood Still. And
that's amazing. I love it.
If you guess where it's coming from, it's actually about grief and actually being still for somebody, and just, dropping everything else and giving them, 30 minutes or an hour of your time, which is huge. So that's what sloths do really well. So hence Stella the sloth.
Oh, I love it. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, I love it. So have you always been a writer? Or is this a development that just
Yeah.
happened?
Well, as I said, there's like these creative juices that kind of come out, and for me, like I've always written, and either like in an academic sense or research sense, or even poems and poetry, or angry letters to my mother, stuff like that. But it was always something that came pretty easily for me, and I did pretty well in school and in writing. It was never something that became part of my career, though. But I think now, I really feel like there's some messages that I want to get out into the world, and something that I want to share with people. Hence coming on this podcast. But that's really, now I feel like I have a little bit more motivation to to do something with a purpose.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to see what happens, like this next season. And thank you for telling Aviva's story and bringing yourself to the work in such a deep way. And we look forward to the next book. So
thank you, Jency, so much. I really appreciate you, for your time and for listening. Thanks so much.
All right, great.
All right.
All right.
Let's sing a song full of hope, full of pain. Why don't you sing along, my friend? For it's our last refrain. Forever young, ever strong, ever brave.